All right. Well, thank you all once again for joining the second of the two SpendHQ training sessions. For those of us that joined our session earlier this week on Tuesday, you already got perspective of a lot of the basic navigation, really the module functionality in a lot of the core areas of SpendHQ. What this second training will start detailing is some of the more nuanced or more complicated areas of the application that have a lot of customization and really a lot of power to be able to detail information in ways that are important to you as an individual user. And you can also share that visualization to other users within the Spend Intelligence platform as well from some of the custom analytics we'll be creating here together today. Now, there will be a couple core areas we'll be spending our time in today's demonstration. Those will be the analytics, the strategy, and the reports area. So those are really the three that we didn't really address in the first day of training. And I want to start off here with the analytics module in my walkthrough today. Now, what does the analytics module really contain? Well, first and foremost, the analytics module is going to have, and bear with me here, just make sure we're queued up on the right data set. The analytics module has the home of effectively building out your own visualization, your own dashboards, or I like to think of this almost as a one-pager of what's important to look at across my spend data. And I'm going to start from scratch in today's demonstration of what does it look like to begin the creation process of a dashboard. Then once I figure out what that dashboard should contain, how do I, one, default this as a view that I can readily see whenever I log into SpendHQ, and how can I share this with other users that they also might have a use for that particular view? Or if you're a particularly adept user at creating these dashboards, you might find yourself creating them for others to help them in their Spend Intelligence journey here in the SpendHQ system. Now, here in the analytics module, everything will start in the same way. That is the plus select data button. And when we begin a brand new dashboard, there's only one button to push here in the whole view. I'm going to click on this plus select data right here on the left-hand side, and you'll see a large propagation of all the various fields and underlying details we have at CSU. For my first widget we'll be creating in today's demonstration, we're going to go as simple as we possibly can. I just want to see the overall total dollar amount. I'm going to title this Total Spend, and then click Create. Well, there you have it. We've made our first and most simple widget you possibly can in the analytics view. We're going to be getting much more complicated with each step. Just want to show that the analytics dashboards are created by using those underlying fields and data. And in this case, I'm looking at the total amount that's being displayed here in the application. For those of us sitting in our first session back on Tuesday, you also may recall that the power filter and date picker will directly correlate with what we're seeing here. So please keep in mind, if I did have a power filter in place or that date picker at a different range, anything you're creating here throughout your analytics journey will be impacted. So keep that in the back of your head as we're going through some of these initial creations. For my second widget, similar process as the first. Click on that little plus widget icon, and you'll see we're awfully similar back to that same screen where we have that plus select data in the top left. Now, this is where I'm going to go a little bit off of that overall track and navigate us down to the bottom left-hand side where we see what's called advanced configuration. My recommendation to all is that this is probably where you want to spend most of your time when using the analytics module. This is because it's a lot easier to customize the visualization you're trying to detail, and of course, make sure it's most indicative of how you're trying to craft your overall dashboard. In this next widget, I'd like perspective of my spend broken out by category in a pie chart. Well, to do so, let's start here with the left-hand side of the screen. We see we have line chart currently detailed as the way in which that data is being visualized. If I click on that downward arrow, you'll see I quickly see the full list of all the various visualizations that we can utilize. Quite a few here in SciSense. So I'm going to go in this particular instance, I'd like to utilize a pie chart. Notice that you have no results here in the center of the screen, and that is because we've not selected any of the dimensions that this data is being visualized with. For my categories, I'm going to select from here the category dimension. My recommendation here as well, versus scrolling through this full larger list, you may find it's much easier as you become more comfortable with your own data structure, just to type in that search bar at the top of the screen. You can turn, I believe we have just about 100 dimensions overall at CSU. This makes it much easier as you start becoming more comfortable in creating those widgets and views for an ongoing and, of course, dynamic nature of this module. If I click on category here in the top left, now we see every category is given the same amount of real estate in my pie chart at 4%. Now, I certainly don't want to see every category with the same amount of real estate because I'd like to have a dimension of how much spend is in each of these spaces to make it easier for me to navigate this data. Well, good thing I've asked because here in the values is where we can bring that element in. And always, 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 the field called amount will be very important when you're creating anything in the analytics module because this is the reference of the overall dollar that's also being expended to give that perspective to your visualization. When I click on total amount, we'll see we now have that total amount dimensioned and now shown here in the center screen in this pie chart. One other tip before we commit the second widget into my dashboard, this little drop down in the bottom right of values lets me also sort this as opposed to alphabetically as clockwise, or if we're looking at a more sequential view versus a pie chart, also by descending. I recommend usually navigating over that direction to make this visualization make more sense and, of course, more intuitive for users to interact with in the future. Now, before I commit this one as well, one last change I'll make. If I navigate over here to the right-hand side, you'll see we have design and filters that can be customized in this particular widget view. Well, in this case, if you want to have that legend detailed, notice you can toggle with these radio buttons how much visualization real estate is given to each of these areas. For depending on what widget you're using, you may find that you want to use more or less of these views to give more real estate in there. Certainly recommend customizing that based on your own needs for how you'd like to have that analytics dashboard show. In my case, though, I'm going to go over here to this Show Others slice. Right now, we can see I'm automatically gravitating all of the ancillary spend, so the smaller areas of spend at CSU into this Others bucket, but I can change that criteria of what constitute others. I'm going to say anything less than 1% as opposed to 3%, giving much more dimension of the spend and making this a little bit more of a granular view of my level 1 category in my analytics module. For my title of this one, I'm going to call this my spend by category. And I do recommend utilizing a title name when you're creating these different widgets because this makes it easier when sharing that dashboard for that other user to know what is contained in this particular widget when they start navigating through your dashboard. Last step, click apply on the top right-hand side. And as easy as that, we've now made 2 widgets in my dashboard, and we're only going to increase from there. Same process as we went through the first 2. Let's also now add some perspective of my campus spend as well. Well, same process when I go to plus widget. We'll see my dialog box is opened up here in the center of the screen. I'm going to go right back here to advanced configuration. And for this advanced configuration, instead of that pie chart, I'm going to say I'd like to see a bar chart in my next visualization. You'll notice we have different layers or options based on the visualization we've chosen. A bar chart allows for a category, a value, just like we saw on our pie chart, but you can also have a slicer or a break by if that's important to you. For this case, I want to have my campus layered in here. So that first layer, we're going to click on campus, and we now have that data populated here in the center. For the second,
Brandon, I'm sorry, a quick pause real quick. There's some posts on the Q&A. Mary is saying, I'm missing the widget, and can you kindly slow down? You're using widgets that they don't all have, so it's hard for them to follow.
I wasn't seeing it either, honestly.
Yeah.
The same view.
What widget?
The add widget
Okay.
button. There,
So
that.
no one has this plus widget icon?
I couldn't find it.
So I'm going to the analytics view over here for overview.
Looks like they have to create a California State University dashboard first. That's what someone says.
And that's what we're creating right now, is a dashboard for California State University.
Someone else said, Laura, Erica, and I, they don't have widgets. It's from Mary.
Okay. So here
Yeah.
I'll go back over here to overview. And
Overview.
if anyone's having an issue, so if you click on that create a dashboard, and it should have a blank screen, which begins with that select data is the first prompt if you've not created a widget yet. And once you made your first widget, it will then go to the plus widget for additional widget views. So does anyone see that plus select data in the top left of their screen for that first creation?
Yes.
So if you click on that plus select widget, that's where we added in this total spend with just amount. And then after you've added in that first widget view and applied, you should have that plus widget icon in the top right for every widget after the first one added in.
They see welcome to spend.
Welcome to spend. Okay. So we'll go back over here and I'll create a brand new dashboard from scratch. And we'll see if everyone's able to see the same view here. So the first prompt will be to create that dashboard, making sure that's of course pointed to California State University. I'll just call this my demo 2. And everyone should see this plus select data in their view as the first option. Plus widget will not be visible until you've created a single widget.
Okay, I see that.
Okay. So in this first case, what we're going to do is click on plus, select data, only going to amount. So we're going to keep it very simple for the first widget view. And I'm just going to call this one my total spend for the title. And actually we can click create directly there. And everything after that point should have that plus widget there in the top right-hand side.
Yes.
Perfect. So that's a great nuance to call out for everyone, where the first option starts in the top left when you begin the widget creation process. After that point, you'll have that plus widget icon in the top right from there on forward. So effectively, you begin with that first creation. Now everything else is going to prompt us with that plus widget in the top right for additional views. And any other questions, Bess, before we continue on?
There's some issues with few users who are coming up as the same person, Mary Carrillo, and it's actually Laura. But it looks like thanks. That's an affirmative. Maybe they're seeing it now.
Okay.
And someone else is saying I can see the widget.
Excellent.
And let's do
Okay.
this for the sake of time. Let's go ahead and go through the training. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end. And we do have a month of hypercare with already scheduled meeting times that I'll be sending out, so we can follow up with more office hours type questions where you can speak and you can share your screen, and we'll get through all those issues on the follow-ups over the next month, if it's okay.
Excellent. Thank you, David.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So from there, I'm going to create the same view that we did just moments ago in this second dashboard. So click on that plus widget icon. We're going to navigate in that bottom left to advanced configuration. And that first widget was followed by the pie chart, where we had a breakdown of my spend by category. So I'm going to select pie chart in the top left. For my categories, I'm actually going to use the category dimension. So that level 1 category dropped in. And then going to follow that up with my values, pointing at the ever important amount field. So always think of that amount as an important element in creating your views and visualizations, as this is the dollar reference here in your spend data. You'll see we have here defaulted to that alphabetical view. I'm going to flip that back down to a clockwise view so we can see that sequentially. And the last change we made was flipping our other slice. So over in the right-hand side underneath the design sub-tab, I'm just gonna open it up to a 1% to allow for all those smaller layers of spend at level 1 categories also to be visualized. I titled this particular widget the spend by category to have that category layer view also here in my dashboard. If I click apply, we actually should be just about exactly where we left off earlier with my second widget. Now for that third widget, I also want to have that layer of campus details. So this will start becoming muscle memory after going through a number of repetitions. We're going to go back to that plus widget icon in the top right-hand side. Advanced configurations we're going to go to from that second step. And here in the top left for my options of visualization, I'd like to have this one as a bar chart here in this case. Noticing we have these 3 different options, categories, values, and a new one that is break by here for this case. I'm going to start off by having my category listing my campus. You'll see all my campuses now populate here on the y-axis in the center of the screen. And I'm going to go over here to values, and you might start seeing as you become more versed in using the analytics module, it's going to start recommending for you what you're oftentimes using based on your own user login. It already recommended you might be wanting to use your amount. I certainly do, and now we have that layered in as my values. If I'd also like to have this going down sequentially, it's a great option here when I hover over values. That small button icon lets me sort that out by descending, making this a little bit more intuitive. And I'm going to call this case my spend by campus. On the right-hand side, before we actually click apply, notice that these options are different. They will be dynamic based on the view that you've selected. So be it a pie chart, a bar chart, whatever that view is, this will be customized based on that particular use case you've selected. In fact, I can even have a title viewed and drop that title in there. All these different toggles will be more important if you were to print this out or bring it as a PDF. So certainly recommend looking at these areas for customization to ensure that your view looks as you'd like it to. I'd also like to make one additional call out with the filters view. This allows for this one specific widget to have a certain amount of spend removed based on any criteria. The best way to think about this is almost like a mini power filter, where you're putting a power filter just on this small subset of view if you don't want to have it included in that widget view and visualization. There's not many use cases where that may be necessary, but for example, if you'd like to have a smaller campus subset, only 4 campuses viewed in your breakdown, you could absolutely do so. So you only have that smaller view to have selectable in this particular widget view. When I click apply in the top right-hand side, we've now made 3 widgets. This is where we start taking it up a notch with how we can change how those materials visualized and continue to refine this to be the most important for my own uses. We'll start by formatting. Let's look at my spend by campus and just click and drag and bring it up here to the top of the screen. Notice that the SpendHQ platform will automatically prompt us with the location, see in that darker coloration. So as you want to move it around, it does prompt you where you'd like to have that viewed from a orientation. The second layer I'd also like to call out is we can give different amounts of real estate to my widgets. So if I click and drag, I can give less real estate here to the top of the screen. Or if I want to have my spend by campus, when we look at the top areas, maybe the top third or so of areas of spend by campus, I can click and drag there on the left-hand side, make it a little bit easier for me to see. This is a perfect time for us to also demonstrate the cross-filtering functionality that exists as we build out widgets. Let's say, for example, I click on San Francisco State. With one click, notice all the spend immediately updates. It's because you have cross-filtering across your full analytics dashboard. So as you build out additional widgets, thinking about how those interact with one another really brings a lot more power to bear for that visualization or for this data to be shared. If you get asked a certain question, what's going on with the spend in the space, you can very quickly refine that down from top down to a smaller view. To back out of it, if you're ever clicked on anywhere into a widget, just note you have that clear selection, which will also populate in the top right-hand side to go back to the full larger view. Now, I'd also like to add in two important layers for my visualization before maybe think about a strong exportable view that my analytics dashboard can naturally gravitate me towards. First off, I want to have a time series. So I really want to understand how that spend is translating month to month. To do that, let's go back to our plus widget. And if you were betting, advanced configuration would be the right call. That's always the spot we're going to be navigating towards as we build out these widget views. And for this case, I'm going to keep my view as a line chart, but on the x-axis, I'd like to understand perspective of the time. So let's bring in our date. Our date of record will be notated just as date when utilizing SpendHQ. Notice we also do have an invoice date, a PO date, and budget date where that's populated for data as well. But the date of record will be date for most cases. Before I click on it, though, this is a good point to point out that we have all items in years showing up right here. Well, that's because we can change the detail of how this dimension shows before we create our widget. What does that really mean? Well, if I click on more, we'll see we can slice this information by years, quarters, months, even going down to weeks and days. In my case, I'd like to have this broken out by months in my view. I'm going to click on months here, and you'll see the months and date now propagate at the bottom of the screen. For the next layer, I'd like to add in that value, and you may have guessed it's going to be amount. I want to see how that amount translates over time. Now, this jagged line can be smoothed very quickly by just clicking in that smooth area to make this look substantially more natural. And this is where I might want to change my legend. We all know this is showing the total amount. We don't really need to give any real estate to that legend. I'll toggle that particular area off here in my view. For this one, I'm going to call this my spend by month. In the top left-hand side for my title. When I click apply, we've now made 4 incrementally more advanced levels of view and visualization. I want to have this time series also at the top of the screen whenever I look at my view front and center. Well, if I bring this up to the very top of the screen, click and drag it just like we saw earlier, it will darken that segment before we commit it to a space. And I can now give different levels of real estate based on what's most important or what really needs more space to be correctly visualized. So now I have my spend by campus, my spend by month, the total overall spend amount, and my spend by category. This is the perfect time to also show how we can customize an existing data point as well before we actually add in more widgets. So how do we change a widget that's already been created? Well, I'm going to update this total spend widget here in the top left-hand side of the screen. To do that, you'll see a small pencil icons pretty often showing up in each of my widget views. Well, that's going to be how we edit or pop the hood of that particular area. Here we see my total amount is listed out as values. I'd like to make 2 changes. I want to make sure it's very clear that this is a dollar amount and not just a numerical amount. I can click on this little 1, 2, 3 to show my overall formatting display. And I'm going to select currency underneath this breakdown. And I do want to have this notated by dollar. Click OK. We now made that currency flag very clear on this widget. For the second change, I also want to know how many how many normalized vendor names. So after SpendHQ has gone through that enrichment process and normalized different permutations of the same vendor, what's the total count that we have in scope of my analysis? Well, I can easily have that displayed by going to secondary, and I'm going to go to normalized vendor name. Front and center now we have number of unique normalized vendor names here at 50,000, also in view, just underneath my total spend. Click apply, and it's easy as that to make customizations of that particular view. The same thing, of course, can be done for my spend by category or spend by campus. Every widget can still be edited before you've locked it in, if you will, or finished out your dashboard. But remember, you can always go back in and edit at a later point if you still have more refinements or changes you'd like to make. My next 2 views I'm going to be creating are a breakdown of my spend by category and now at the subcategory level. So that's my level 2 for my categorization. And I also want to have a really strong data export that gives me perspective of the POs that are attributed to the spend I'm detailing. Starting off with that first one, let's get that perspective of spend by subcategory. Click on that plus widget icon in the top right-hand side. Navigate down to advanced configuration. And I'm going to, once again, be looking here at the bar chart view. And for this case, I would like to have perspective at the category slicer to my subcategories. That's my level 2 in my categorization to be selected here. Give that a click. We'll see the full 352 procurement level subcategories that we've categorized data into. And we're going to have that layered in with my dollar amounts as well. This is where it's really important to remember, in most cases, you'll probably want to be sorting this information sequentially. So I'm going to go down to that descending sort as opposed to that full top line view. You can also change, once again, the overall visualization to make it a little bit easier to see when looking at the full top-down level. Last layers, I'm going to make a change for here. I'm going to remove my legend there at the right-hand side. I'm going to call this my spend by subcategory. Click apply on the top right-hand side. And we've now made a number of widgets that really allow for a lot of cross-filtering here in my data. But that cross-filtering really needs to also be able to have an exportable data set as well as that next step. So I can bring my spend by subcategory over here to the right-hand side. I'm going to gravitate this to a smaller view. And now I'd like to have that exportable view here at the bottom of my screen to always pull this data as soon as it's needed for a particular ask. Let's go here to the plus widget. Jump back over here to advanced configuration. And for the first time so far in the demonstration today, we're actually going to be going to a pivot view as opposed to those more visual oriented versions like line charts and bar charts, etc. If I click on pivot, we're going to start off here with my rows. And this is where I want to have those crucial ingredients or those crucial areas of that data that are being refined. For the first one, I want to have my perspective of my vendor names. Type in norm, and we'll see my normalized vendor name is that first one we're going to have layered in. For that second piece, I'd also like to have visualized. I want to know my PO numbers associated. If I type in number, we'll see we have all my PO numbers all also detailed if they apply to spend for that particular vendor. For that next layer, I also want to see my category and subcategory attributed. I can click on category and subcategory also for being visualized. If the event, I also want to see my campus or other underlying details, continue building out these rows. What I like to suggest too, when we're creating a particular view, just know that SpendHQ will default to being able to at least display up to 50,000 records, but you can export up to the limit of what Excel can handle, which I believe is just over 1 million records. Always think about material in the sense of what would this look like if I were to pull out to Excel to pivot it separately or analyze on my own, as we do have all spend data at CSU going back for spend through 2020. So of course, there is a large amount of data here that you're pulling, and the same limitation that exists in Excel for other solutions will still exist here. So if you try to pull more data than Excel can handle, that will be something that can be encountered. I also want to see, before I finish off this view, I want to see my amount, and I want to see the buyers attributed to it. Now, here's one mistake that we intentionally made that I want to talk through as well. Notice we have amount in the row section, but not in the value section. The reason we want to have amount down here in values is really because it's a value in how we're summing up this information. It's not too hard to make that shift. In fact, I can even click and drag as you're building out those different fields to make this even easier for how you're getting that material displayed. I'm also going to sort this out here by descending in this case for that data when we start refining through the different areas of spend. This is just going to be called a data export. here in the top left-hand side. And notice this really is much more of a table. This is not something that we're interacting with. This is what we're going to be pulling out of SpendHQ for just a particular use case or need. Click apply on the top right-hand side, and we've now made really a data export that will be affected by all these widgets here in the top of the screen. So let's now use this in practice. Let's say I want to look at just June of 2023 spend at San Francisco State for electricity. Well, if I make one click up here in the top left-hand side, we're now looking just at June 2023. If I want to look at one particular campus, let's just select San Francisco State right here in the top right-hand side. Notice we've now gone down from that $3 billion spend down to 35 million. And here in my dropdown, you'll see those categories and subcategories make it very easy for me to see. I personally recommend going from the largest to smallest. So it might be easier for me to start off with the utilities section. So here we go over to my utilities subsection. We have $1.3 million in utilities. And then with one last click, I'm now looking at my electricity spend specifically. So very quickly, you can really go down to individual levels of granularity. And depending on how you have it to customize, you can also pull that data really easily out. What I like to have here too, is as I've gone through that little customization, you look on the right-hand side, we'll see my filters also propagate with what we drilled into. If you ever want to back out of each of these pieces, don't forget you have the ability to clear selection on one area, noticing that the subcategory still exists, but it now shows include all. You can also toggle these off directly here on the right-hand side as you back up to go to the full layer of spend in that particular area. So you have a lot of ability for going from top level spend down to a smaller subsection of spend in this view. As we already saw in our first training session, you have a lot of abilities with our built out dashboards and views through other modules that give you strong visibility. This is where you're able to go to just use cases that might be really important for your own needs or your own team. To go back out through each of those areas, I'm just going to toggle those off. And now we have gone to the full earlier dashboard view of the full data set. Some other nuances just to mention with the analytics module before we look at some other sections are one, how do I export data from this system? Well, two areas that you can go through that process. Here in the top right-hand side, you'll see what looks like a small PDF button. This is actually how you can configure and pull this material out as a PDF. This will be dependent on how that data that you're visualizing is being looked at. But notice when I click on this PDF view, you can change the overall paper format size. In most cases, you'll probably want this to be in a much larger format view. And you can make sure that, of course, looks as you'd like it to if you share this with other users or others that don't have access to SpendHQ. This also helps you make sure that your format is maybe most indicative and you have the views most representative of what you'd like to have shared. I'm actually going to create the PDF here, but if you want to save this PDF or print it, just click Save in the bottom left-hand side. Similarly, with that PDF button, let's say we can pull out material in Excel and analyze separately. Well, this data export in the bottom of the screen was exactly what we created it to do. If I want to pull this data out, you see those small 3-dot icons on the right-hand side of that widget. So we have a number of options that propagate based on that click. In this case, I want to actually download this data. You'll see when you hover over any of the widgets in SpendHQ, you will have the ability to download it via an image, or what we're really looking for here, a CSV or an Excel file. This is where you can pull that data directly out of the system and analyze separately directly from analytics. It's a great way to pull information out, or if you'd like to have a different view, namely maybe a graph, you can also download those as an image. Now with some of those views, you might want to share that dashboard you've created to others across your organization. Well, we also have that feature here in the analytics module. In the top right-hand side, it kind of looks like a small constellation. This is the share button, and it does exist in other areas of SpendHQ as well. But you can click on that share button. This is where you're actually able to drop in the other individual that can share this, or individuals. This can be shared with any other user at CSU that does have SpendHQ access. You notice you can also use name that they're attributed with or their email address. So it makes it really easy for you to drop that information over. Now, one call out I'd like to make when sharing that material to someone, just note here for this example. This is another individual at SpendHQ. When sharing that data, notice that you have different toggle credentials you can make in your shared dashboard. In most cases, you probably want them to be able to view it. This means they cannot edit that dashboard, and they'll also be able to see changes if you're making ongoing edits to that dashboard you've shared with them. If you allow them to design it, they can actually go in and edit that particular dashboard, or you can even build out a skeleton of a dashboard and then make another individual an owner, and effectively they're now that full credentialed individual who can make edits, and if they then share it with other individuals, they will then be reflected. In most cases, I would expect you're using View, but they all have certainly a use case in their own right. If I don't want to share an individual that I've selected, just click the little trash icon and they'll be dropped off. Last thing to call out when looking here, you'll see this little email reports. This will allow for that user to receive an email notification when a change has been made to that dashboard. I'm not going to save or share this with other individuals, but also note you have a dashboard URL that you can easily share with someone else. This will let them see that dashboard if they do have login credentials. So this is some of the top level functions within a analytics dashboard. This area has a ton of power and customization. And if there's anywhere in SpendHQ I'd recommend looking at our knowledge base and looking at individual separate trainings, it is this one, because we could easily spend hours talking about different views, different use cases, and how this might be pertinent to your own needs. That's where my handy help button in the top right-hand side comes back into play. Really recommend using this and going for analytics. So I click back on the little help icon on the top right-hand side. Analytics dashboard module. That's what I want to take a look at. This is one of my favorite areas to get additional detail, and of course, some videos associated with that training on this video. Introduction to Analytics module is a great additional resource after we go through this initial orientation training. I'll get back to my analytics module by just clicking on that tab there in the top left-hand side. So we've spent a lot of time on the analytics module. We also called out there were two other areas you really want to spend time when looking at some of the more custom or detailed portions of SpendHQ. One of those is going to be the reports in the bottom left-hand side. That's our custom exports. Custom exports are where I recommend spending time if you want to pull data out of SpendHQ. So while we saw we can pull it directly out of the analytics dashboards with that data export, if you do want to pull data out that's just large tables, think of this as almost creating your own massive SQL query of all spend data. This is where you are looking to pull that information from. Custom exports is your place. I'm going to go ahead and click on custom exports and begin the creation of a new export data set. You'll see I have some earlier test ones that were created, but I want to start new and do so in the top right-hand side. You'll see generate export. This is what I want to begin the process of. Create a new export from SpendHQ. Now, what do we want to call our new export? Well, just like we saw with our power filters, in most cases, you want to name this what the information is you're pulling out, but we are in demonstration today. I'm just going to call this my test demo in this case. SpendHQ will also automatically prompt you with a date range. I'm going to say this is going to go from June 30 of 2020 up through July 23 of, July 31st of 23. You'll also see we have two options for my report format. This is really important for us to know about, as line item will create every individual record in my export, whereas group by will aggregate this and make it a smaller data set from a overall record count. Reason I call this out, Excel's limitations can rear its head when dealing with these very large data sets. So if you were to pull every single PO for the past 3 years at every campus, you might start running into the case that Excel cannot handle that volume of data. It's over 1 million records. Group by, in most cases, maybe what you want to use to make sure your files are still digestible for your computer to pull into an Excel format. You'll also notice you can apply a power filter in that view you'd like to pull out. Notice when I click on that checkbox, it will prompt you with all of your own power filters. So just like we saw in the demonstration yesterday, that campus subset of those 3 campuses, I could select that right here as my overall base criteria. I like to start with just going the aggregate here in my demonstrations, but always know a power filter can be applied to what your export contains. When I click on continue, we're going to see a very familiar list. We now once again have all of my various data points and dimensions here in my data set that can now select, interact with, and of course, pull out in a large, clean table format. Let's say I want to see all of my spend broken up by category, subcategory, campus, and all the underlying GL accounts. Well, I really like using the search bar. I recommend getting more comfortable with the names of the various fields, as this helps a lot of that navigation. I'm just going to start with category by typing CATE. We'll see we have category and subcategory here as a little checkbox. Notice SpendHQ has also told me 2 of 10 dimensions have now been selected. For my next layers, I'll bring my perspective of my vendor name. And how about my normalized payment terms? It'd be great to have payment term information here in my export. But also like to see perspective of my GL accounts. I'm going to bring in my GL account details. Notice we also have GL account code in the full string as options. Maybe I also want to have the code or the numerical piece in this particular view. Now that I've selected 6 dimensions, last things I want to also include are my campus. And of course, it would not be an export if we did not include the amount. Click on that double chevron here in the center of the screen. You'll see those 8 dimensions we selected on the left immediately pop over here to the right. This is where you'll see you can actually click and drag where you'd like to have different fields displayed in your export. You're going to have my normalized supplier name front and center, category, subcategory, alongside payment terms. Maybe I want to have GL account in front of this value, and perhaps I want campus here at the very, very front of this overall export. If you want to pull an option out, as you might expect, just click on the X icon on the right-hand side of a particular dimension. Let's go ahead and click continue here in the bottom right. And now we'll see a sample of what I've created. And one of my favorite aspects here of this view, you'll notice the records count shows me just how big is this export going to be. Really, it's a good sign if we see something over 1 million records, it's going to start backing to the point where Excel can't handle it. So we know this file will still be usable when we pull the information out of the system. My personal preference, I like to oftentimes have this formatted to CSV, but CSV or Excel should work excellently either way. Now, if I click generate, you're telling SpendHQ, I want to see this particular data set now generated, and please build out this full table for me to pull into Excel separately from the system. While going through that process, in most cases, you should see these generate within about 45 seconds. Really depends on the overall volume of the data. You'll see here it starts up 30%, 70, and it should be done here in just a second. Excellent. SpendHQ lets me know my export generation is complete. I can even click right here, complete, to go directly to it, or click on my test demo, and I can click download selected. In the top right-hand side of Google Chrome, you'll see your downloads in progress. And just for the sake of today's demonstration, I do want to take a quick opening of that file to show that here for everyone. Note that this smaller export that we made for a group by was about 13 megabytes. Depending on your settings as well, across CSU, you might actually find that's too large for some emails. So just be cognizant of what that may look like when pulling out that data. Bear with me here while this pulls up, and I'll start sharing my screen with that new poll. So you'll see here, we now have that export view with all of my campuses. And of course, I can go through any formatting I'd like and even pivot that material separately if wanted. Now we have a great breakdown of my campus, maybe my dollar amounts. You'll see that very, very quickly. So a great way to be able to take that large amount of data that we've all consolidated and condensed across all of the CSU, and of course, pull it into a separate Excel file if you'd like to either analyze separately, or if you're trying to create material based on the spend data that we've categorized as SpendHQ. I'll go back now over here to SpendHQ. Bear with me while it pulls back up. And we're back here in custom exports. So that custom export functionality pulls data out, analytics lets me see visualizations that are, of course, not just great for my own use, but I can share them with other users. You'll also see that we have the ability to use this strategy module, the last crucial area of today's demonstration, which has great future planning functions as far as our spend is concerned. Let's go ahead and jump in the strategy module and build our first savings roadmap together. So the strategy module is really the home of looking at that spend data and attributing where we expect savings could be captured and really helping drive procurement strategy into the future, usually on an annual planning basis. This is actually very similar to the structure that Insight Sourcing, our original parent company, goes through many of their assessments and overall analyses. We're going to create that process here together. To begin that process, let's go ahead and click Create New here in the center of the screen. You'll see we begin prompted with first a title. I should call this my savings demo. Notice you also have different groupings that this will have your spend segmented out into. The default will always be high, medium, and long term. Notice you can also exclude certain areas from your savings calculations if appropriate. I'm going to exclude my long term just for the sake of today's demonstration to show how that's visualized by clicking on that checkbox. Notice you can also create additional roadmap groupings. You can remove entire groupings. So make sure that this pertains to how you'd like to have it bucketized when you're beginning that creation process. Let's click Create Opportunity in the bottom right-hand side, just for this overall basic setting. What SpendHQ is doing now is beginning that creation process of that view by creating a really nice savings waterfall, starting off with my roadmap. At first, nothing is highlighted. It's because nothing's really been edited or represented with what the material should show. Well, in order to edit those pieces of information, let's go ahead and take a look at all the other toggles we have here in my view. Here in the top right-hand side, you'll see we have this small Edit button. This is probably where most of our time is spent in the strategy module on the earlier phase when still creating what that view is going into detail. Well, when I go into this view, you'll see a breakdown of all of my spend broken out by subcategory. You'll see we have our total spend here in my table, as well as my addressable percentages. Now, what do all these represent? Well, that total spend will give my spend perspective of the date pickers range. So in this case, we see electronic security as $4.7 million in the past 12 months. Addressable percentage will say if we were to go out to market, how much of the spend could actually be eligible for that RFP. So maybe we already have some that's really ingrained. We have suppliers and contracts that we can't really navigate away from in that particular subcategory. We want to make sure that addressable percentage is most accurate to our knowledge of what we could actually move should we actually go source it. So with that 50% addressable percentage, you see our target spend drops down to about 2.3 million. And in fact, you can hover over those little areas in the top right-hand side to see what's being detailed for that view. Target spend is our total spend multiplied by the addressable percent. Scrolling a little bit further over here to the right-hand side, you'll also see the excluded flag. This is where you'd like to exclude or remove this particular area for any savings or billboard KPI metrics. Well, that's also very, very similar to these billboards we're looking here at the top of the screen as we navigate through this information. We see our 3 billion total spend. Our in-scope spend is 2.6. Once again, that's automatically removing the unaddressable and areas you might have excluded for spend. So if you want to exclude certain areas and click Save Changes, we would remove that $2.3 million over here from my in-scope view. This ease calculation is a little bit less important, but still something you can track. We'd like to use kind of a barometer of 1 to 100 of how difficult would it be to source this particular segment. Now, we automatically attribute some of these values just based on some ballparks, but this is also free for customization for an individual user. And we also have the ability to create functional owners for each of my subcategory segments. These are some default values we populate here at the start, but notice here in the pencil icon in the top left, you can change what the functional owner options are in your savings roadmap. Let's say I'd also like to create one with the Chancellor's Office. You can make that CO separate group, click Save, and you'll see now when I click that drop down, we have the CO option as my functional owner. The last areas here on the right-hand side will be our benchmark savings, and then of course your override savings. These benchmark savings should give an initial perspective of if you were to go out to market for that particular good or service, if it is a consistent or indirect subcategory we've seen across other clients, well, at least you have a ballpark value of what you could expect to see captured in savings here. That's certainly not to be taken as the absolute source of truth. We do allow for customization here. So let's say, for example, you're looking at your spend and you say this electronic security, I really don't think that 8.5 estimated center point is accurate. I only think about 5% could be realized here. Well, I click on 5, you'll see immediately that potential savings updates based on that input value. That potential savings is a calculation of that estimated savings percentage multiplied by your target spend. So that means the addressables already been removed from that overall data set. The last thing to call out here in my roadmap grouping or my roadmap assignment is that roadmap grouping. I can group this into separate segments as I go through this data in the high, low, or long-term priority, just like we saw on that initial screen when going through the process. All of this can be updated directly in SpendHQ, be it from this sort of category, naturally going through the table, or if there are users that feel more comfortable with pulling data out into a CSV and updating it into a table, you can also do that very easily by clicking on the CSV or Excel export on the bottom left-hand side, and all this exact same information will exist in a large Excel file with that full 334 records. And you can drop that information back in the bottom right-hand side to upload all that information in one click. This area has a lot of power, but also takes some configuration to really put in those ballpark initial estimates. Once this is all completed and created, I'm just going to select a couple options very, very quickly to show some visualization toggles. First, sorting out for my large potential savings. I'm going to put a couple roadmap groupings just to show how that visualizes on the front or the larger data table point of the screen. Notice that when I click long-term priority on a number of these, they default immediately to 0. That's because I clicked exclude on the front, or at least the beginning of this overall creation process. Click Save Changes, and we've now put in some inputs into my overall savings roadmap. Let's see how that now translates when I go back to the roadmap view. If I click on roadmap, notice we now have some coloration attributed to what's been selected. Construction equipment, we see that architecture and interior design, furniture, vertical transport, IT consulting, all those areas that I selected are now highlighted based on the bucketization that I detailed. You'll also see as we go through this information, I can show my savings. This is really helpful to layer in where that area of opportunity may lie. Noticing the 0 has also been dropped in for those long-term that I selected as a default value. You can bring in functions as an additional layer. So if you had attributed functions, they will be all listed out here. I think we only attribute that one just to the CO, but notice that is something you can have layered into your view. You can also make this view much smaller by selecting or deselecting certain areas. A lot of our clients like to remove the unassigned just to look at those that have made a prioritization to make this a much more digestible and smaller view of what's important. And of course, my potential savings very, very much change based on those input changes I just made. And that will update for each individual savings demonstrate or savings roadmap. So don't feel like you can break anything. Your savings roadmap is your own that you can share with others, but these values that you've created will not cause any negative impact into your SpendHQ data. Other than the roadmap, within the strategy module, you also have a great breakdown of, first off, the spend waterfall, your total spend, pulling out that unaddressable spend, everything that's been excluded based on your own individual criteria, and giving perspective of, well, what's my truly in-scope spend that I can look to actually act upon. This area oftentimes is used as a PDF too by many of our procurement teams as a reference or a view of where the opportunity really lies in the savings potential. And this last area, the savings summary, will bring that distillation of all those groupings to make it very easy to see how many subcategories, how many vendors across those subcategories, and really what's the spend in the eye of the pie, or the size of the pie over here in each of these segments. So in today's walkthrough, we really hit on 3 sections of SpendHQ. The analytics module to create your own unique visualizations that meet your own use cases, and then how to, of course, share those with other users. We looked at the ability to pull out data from SpendHQ and the custom exports functionality. And we built our first orientation of the savings roadmap tool within the strategy module, where we can create that area for future planning, really see where spend is currently transpiring in the organization, attributing how much savings we can capture in each of these subcategories, and then, of course, creating that in multiple views and pulling that material out if we want to edit it separately. This concludes the second training session, but as David mentioned, we will be having hypercare here in the next 4 weeks for any questions, additional training sessions, as individuals start getting more and more familiar and logging into the tool more. But I can't thank everyone enough for sitting down with today's training session, and please have a great rest of your Thursday afternoon.
Thank you, Brandon. Everyone, appreciate you attending today. As you can see, this is a very powerful tool, but it does take some time and effort to master. Suggest that when you go back and watch these videos after I post them, you can slow them down. I basically had to take my hand off the mouse just to watch and absorb, but I'd like to go back to the video and you can slow down, rewind, and hit on the areas that you're interested in. You can also go into the help section that Brandon mentioned, and based on your job and responsibilities and interests, learn as much or little about the tool as possible, but it's very powerful. I hope you all were able to see that. Could you also, if you have any questions about specific things that you'd like us to cover during the hypercare, if you could send me a direct email, say no later than end of day Tuesday. We'll take feedback before that, but I actually have a meeting with Brandon on Wednesday, our first meeting after the demos to kind of discuss our plan, and then we'll be sending out the training, the hypercare office hours and specific dedicated training during our hypercare. So thank you again very much for attending and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.